check. Welcome to the Dire Wolf Show, where we believe that America is exceptional and that our constitutional rights should never be infringed. I am Dire Wolf. On our show, we bring you the truth and debunk fake news. If you love laughing at the insanity of the regressive left, sit back and relax. Boy, do I have a show for you.
There we go. Okay. Alrighty. Welcome back, Wolfpack. This is Fox Trevize here for our, no, not our weekly news recap. I did not change the title for that. We are here for a Dire Discusses, but since we are sans Dire, it's more of a Dire Discussions. We are behind enemy lines on YouTube, where speech is not free and the truth is demonetized. We are also on DLive, which is our preferred platform. It is also much more fun because you get to post GIFs in chat, and some of the GIFs are a little naughty. So if you're on YouTube right now, we thank you very much for your support over there, but head over to DLive. A lot more fun. Alongside me is not Dire Wolf, but more on that later. Instead, I have alongside me Mr. Krieg Blackpaw. Krieg describes himself as a libertarian nationalist, man after my own heart right there. He is also an Army veteran, thank you for your service, which makes him much more qualified to discuss our topic today, which is Iran. He is also a fellow content creator who you can follow on Twitter at Krieg_Blackpaw on DLive, on Twitter, and then also on DLive at DLive.tv/Krieg_Blackpaw. How you doing today, Krieg? Not a problem. So you want to tell us a little bit about your channel, about the content you produce? Do some shilling real quick before we get started here. Oh no, that is. Oh, now there is audio for you. That's all right. Krieg was not talking prior to me just asking him that question. So, Krieg, how you doing? There we go.
I am doing grand. I am 100%. Thank you very much for having me on. I've been watching you guys.
Steve, hey, whoa, please turn your audio back on for Krieg.
I just did. We're good
cool.
to go. Thank you, Dire. Hi, Dire. So Dire is here. I lied. Krieg's doing fine. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the content that you produce? We'll do a little shilling.
Yeah. So the content that I produce is basically shit posting live. Basically, I play video games and talk about my bullshit opinions. And sometimes people come to hang out and check it out. So yeah, follow me at Kriegpaw and DLive, and you can check me out on Fridays at 7 o'clock. I usually play a little bit of RimWorld and talk about weird political things, current state. So
yep. So I'll post his links here in chat. Do his DLive, and then his Twitter handle is up on screen there for you guys. Do recommend following him. You guys know how important followers are to us on DLive because it unlocks new things as you get more of them. And we'd much appreciate you showing Krieg some love and giving him followers. Alrighty, so the big question on everybody's mind today: where is Dire? I fired him. His spelling mistakes were just too much to handle, and we both decided that it was best for the company if we parted ways. In all seriousness, though, the topic of discussion tonight is the situation in Iran. While it appears to have cooled off for now, it was an extremely active situation while it was happening, and there is still a lot going on in the background. Active military members are sometimes limited in their opinions about what they can express publicly about current events, military strategies, and their leadership, especially including the commander-in-chief. So, for professional reasons and for personal integrity, rather than placing massive restrictions on what we can talk about tonight, or being forced to decide being forced to decide between being dishonest with the audience or his duty as a soldier, Dire decided to step down for tonight and let Krieg and I discuss the Iranian situation a little more openly. He is not totally gone, though. He is still out there in DLive chat, probably giving me lots of hell, and I wrote that before I realized I was going to have audio issues tonight, which I should have known because I have audio issues every night. So feel free to ignore me and chat with him about what a terrible job I'm doing. But if you feel like listening to me, or at least listening to Krieg, because his opinion is pretty important. Like I said, we'll be discussing the Iran situation, which I don't think actually has a name yet. So I've been feeling it's been speaking to me to call it the Iranian missile crisis, kind of has a ring to it. So that is what I'm going to be calling it from now on. But whatever you want to call it, we'll be doing a rundown of the timeline for the entire year so far, which has really only been 9 days, that led up to the Iranian missile crisis, and then what has happened after that. And then after that, after we kind of go through what's happened most recently, we'll kind of do some discussion on where we go from here. And then Krieg has prepared for us a very nice review of about the last century of Iranian history, which there's a lot of stuff that's happened in Iran that's kind of gets lost in the mix, and we can't really you can't rely on the mainstream media to actually provide context from before 3 minutes ago. They can't even be bothered to provide context from the Obama administration, or even like, over the summertime. So, it'll be kind of interesting to go through some of that deeper history to see how they became the terror supporting state that they are. Sound good, Krieg?
Sounds like a solid plan.
Fantastic. Alrighty, so we are starting off with what happened. So 10 days ago, we have, as you guys remember, we have the embassy in Iraq being attacked by an Iranian militia force, which was described as protesters, but really not. That happened on the 31st of December. You guys may remember that Dyer and I reviewed that last Thursday, and the quote-unquote protesters invaded the embassy, caused significant damage, burned it down. Everyone was kind of at the time comparing it to Benghazi, but unlike under Obama, Trump did not leave our ambassadors and members of the State Department there to die. He got them out safely. So no one died. We did lose quite a few embassy buildings, though.
And then about 7 days ago, a U.S. guided missile strike kills 2 people in Iraq. First, we took out Soleimani, Iran's top general, widely thought to be next in line for Iranian leadership and often called like second in command, basically, of next to the supreme leader. He doubles as coordinator for terror cells in the Middle East. Between his multiple positions, he's responsible for the deaths of more than 600 U.S. servicemen. He's also killed many civilians in the region. Yesterday, there was a classified briefing for Congress that reviewed the intelligence used to determine that Soleimani was an imminent threat to American interests. The consensus from the Republicans is that the evidence was clear. The consensus from Democrats was that this did not meet the burden of an imminent threat. Second, the guy that was directly led, he was the guy who led the attack on the embassy, basically.
Yeah, that was the second guy that got hit.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So over the next, we got a map up here on the screen for you guys too. So right now, what we were just talking about was the U.S. embassy and where Soleimani got killed. That both happened, and both those events happened in Baghdad, which is the capital of Iraq. That is over here with the green circle around it. Just to give you guys kind of a layout of the region. I know there was a recent kind of poll where people were given a world map and told to point to where they thought Iran was, and there was a lot of people got it right. They got it in the general vicinity of the borders of Iran, and then there was a lot of people who had them literally in every place in the world, like all over Europe, England. Some people had them in America. So I don't want to necessarily, I'm not the greatest at world geography anyways. So, that's fine. But just for your guys' reference, this is the area that we're talking about. If you go up to the region of the world that this is in, if you go up to the northwest, which would be the top left corner of this map here, that's headed towards Europe. That's Turkey up in the top corner there. So just kind of give you guys an idea of what the layout is, and kind of how these areas are related to each other. So that's what happened last week. That was how we kicked off the new year, which was very kicked it off with a bang for sure. The next few days and over the course of the weekend, a lot of tensions rising. World War III had kind of already been trending after the new year, or after the embassy attack. It had kind of been lightly trending. There have been kind of some little talkings about the draft here and there, and those kind of started, I believe, if I remembering correctly, those started after the embassy attack, but they kicked in a lot more strongly after Trump took out those two targets, one of them being Soleimani. There was a lot of really disgusting admiration of Soleimani in the media, and in particular, I thought that Anderson Cooper's was the most memorable. Anderson Cooper compared Soleimani to de Gaulle. And for those of you who are not...
that's disgusting.
Yes. For those of you who are not French history majors, de Gaulle was the leader of the French resistance during the Nazi occupation of their country. He was a true hero of World War II. He's extremely brave, extremely resourceful in the face of one of the most evil entities that this planet has ever seen, operating with zero resources, essentially. It's just, you're when you're operating in an occupied country, you don't have anybody supporting you. Like, it's it's unimaginable. But you just think through that a little bit. And so Anderson Cooper is saying that Soleimani.
Hey Fox, it's looking like the map's not up on the screen.
Oh no. Well, I will fix that. There we go. Perfect. It's just because Dyer left doesn't mean I'm going to do any better, you guys. You guys know that.
I'll probably make it worse.
That's all right. So Anderson Cooper's trying to compare Soleimani to this war hero of the French resistance during World War II. Again, like I said, he was a very extremely brave guy. This de Gaulle guy was. And Cooper's analogy is just so terribly ignorant of what it is that de Gaulle was and what it is that Soleimani was. As I said, if you're a resistance in an occupied country, you don't have any support of like a state actor. Soleimani had the full support of the Iranian state at his back. He's also got, it's a modern state as well. Even having a full state backing you up in the 30s and late 30s and 40s. That's not anything compared to a modern state today. Soleimani's got all kinds of intel that he's got access to, all sorts of support, military assets. Not the same as de Gaulle. And then Soleimani has also killed a lot of civilians, some of his own civilians as well. Part of the I'm forgetting again which one it was, but I believe Soleimani is the minority of the sects between Islam, which is Sunni and Shia. I think it's Shia is the minority, and I believe that Soleimani was Shia. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that. And he's killed a lot of Sunnis, even Iranian Sunnis. And de Gaulle obviously was not killing his own citizens, which is disgusting. And then to kind of top it off, if that to use that analogy, that de Gaulle was going up against the Nazis, America would be the Nazis in that analogy as compared to Soleimani. So not only did Anderson Cooper just drag through the mud as hard as possible a true hero of a very difficult war that should live on in memory, he also compared the Americans to Nazis by accident. Probably not even by accident. He's just an idiot. It's very, very disgusting. But that was just one of an endless stream of the media from a lot of different organizations, kind of pouring praise onto Soleimani, saying he's a very he's a big war hero, and he's a very good leader and all this stuff. And be that as it may, the kind of analogy to that would be people say, well, Hitler was a good leader, he's just a bad guy. That's probably the same thing here. It's just the idea of trying to stir up the American imagination that this guy was this really great power figure that Trump just murdered is very, very disgusting. Let's see here. The general commentary on the right during this time, during the few days after the embassy and before the missiles this week, the general commentary on the right was kind of a split between people that were happy that Trump had taken action and America was not just rolling over anymore, and then the other side was kind of like, that's nice and all, but we would very much not like to get dragged into another war, especially after Trump promised to get us out of the Middle East. Also during this time, Trump is sending 3,000 troops to Iraq to join the 5,000 troops that are already there, which a lot of people were very disappointed to hear.
Yeah, and then on top of it, we have Iraq. Their parliament decided to kick us out. So they voted on a non-binding resolution to rescind the invitation currently allowing the U.S. to station troops there. Many see this as a perfect out being given the United States. And if any of you got to see Tucker Carlson's kind of spiel on that, he was basically one of the people. Somebody on the right basically championing, saying, hey, Iraq wants us out. Iraq's telling us to leave. Now's a good time to get out. So basically, it's a way for us to leave without declaring it a retreat or abandonment. This may be true, and we should get out, but reports of the vote were largely overrated. The current prime minister is acting only. I do not understand the process or the specifics, but basically he was impeached for being an Iranian shill. Iran wants us out of Iraq, and just because Iran wants us out is not a reason to stay. And a majority of Iraq's parliament did not even vote on this resolution. So to say that the people of Iraq have spoken is a bit of a stretch. And not only that, but Iraq has wanted us there. They wanted us out. They've changed their mind 100 times. And I'm sure once we leave, and the next batch of Islamic terrorists or Kurdish fighters or whatever it is, whatever the aggressor du jour is, I'm sure that they'll probably be like, hey, could you come back, please? Because we haven't developed enough to be able to fight our own battles yet. So, yeah, time will tell. Who knows what Iraq will decide?
Yeah, and I agree with Tucker on that. Well, I agree with the people saying that is a good excuse to get out. Like Krieg just said there, the idea that they actually asked us to get out is maybe a little bit questionable, because the way that their parliament works is not the way that it was shown in the media, that it was this unified group of everybody who represents Iran or Iraq voting on this thing. Is a little bit weaker than that, but. If we need an excuse to get out, and that's the one that we take, I love it. However, like you said, they want us there. They don't want us there. They will want us there. They will not want us there. They haven't. I don't think that we should be crafting our foreign policy around the whims of what some Iraqis would like us to do. I think that it is interesting to have their opinion on what they would like us to do, but I think that we need to make that decision independent of what their current whims are. And so while I will take the excuse of them wanting us to leave, I think that we need to leave on our own accord for our own reasons. Let's see here. During this time, also over the weekend and at the end of last week, Trump and Iranian officials were trading jabs on Twitter. Don't you guys just love the 2020s already? Trump states that he might be willing to go after cultural sites. There are mixed responses to this, and not mixed as in like wishy-washy. It was either like, yes, I love this, or no, this is awful. I kind of fall on the no, this is awful. I think there has been a lot of ancient culture, like really ancient culture. ISIS went through and destroyed a lot of Sumerian sites and older sites. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about 5, 6, 7,000 year old sites that that's not theirs. That's humanity's. That is human origins. That is not theirs to have. And so Trump, I don't think was talking about any of those. I think he was talking more about like mosques and different areas that were important to them there. I really, just from like a human perspective, I'm not a fan of iconoclasm from anybody. I think all history is important. All structures are important, and those should be preserved as much as possible. Now, I understand that was bluster, and that Trump has, since we've found out, didn't really mean that, because he was kind of put to the test, and he pulled back on that, which I think was that was an overstep. He should not have tweeted out a threat that he was not ready to back up. So we're gonna have a discussion later on about this idea of deterrence, about having the big stick and carrying around this, the threat of violence is what keeps these people in line. Well, that may be true, but this tweet was very much a threat of violence that Trump did not commit on. And you cannot make the deterrence only works if they think that you're going to commit on your threats. And if Trump's out there making threats willy-nilly, which I think that he learned from this, and I think that he won't do this again, hopefully. But that was not a good moment for him to have made that threat and then not back it up. And then one point I do want to make before we move on is the kind of consensus is over the last week before the Iranian missile attack, which we're going to get to in a second here. The consensus is mostly that if Iran were to ever do anything, we would just devastate them immediately. And so I for those of us that don't want to go to war in the region, we still don't doubt that we could just glass Iran over the course of a weekend if we wanted to. The U.S. military is literally the strongest military force in the history of the known universe. No one is doubting that we would win a war with Iran. But using that force has a cost. Some of it are direct costs like money and, much more importantly, lives. And then there's also a lot of indirect costs to the stability of the world. So yes, we would 100% dominate them, but it would not be a free, meaning without cost, thing for us to do. So just keep that in mind in the future, and then as you're kind of evaluating this situation.
Yeah, and going forward, so then about 2 days ago, basically it seems like last week all this happens, and the modern age, it just keeps rolling, unfortunately. Tuesday evening in the U.S., Wednesday morning, just after midnight in Iraq, Iran fired missiles into Iraq at two coalition bases where U.S. troops were believed to be stationed, as well as Iraqis and several other nationalities across the globe. A coalition base means that it's technically not a U.S. base, but we still have stuff and people stationed there.
Yep. So we've got that marked out on the map. Over here, you got the two red circles. Those are the two bases. The one that is lower, Alan al-Adadi. Adad? There we go. Airbase. That one had the most missiles hit it. That was 10 missiles struck there. And then the one up to the north, Arib, that one had one missile strike. It's reported that at least 4 missiles failed to reach their target in addition to those 11 that did. And then it's also been reported that as many as 7 more were fired. There's a couple different numbers out there. And those ones were probably taken out by anti-missile defense systems is kind of the going theory, or they weren't fired, or they also didn't make it to their target. There's still... it's still hard to pull specific numbers on that. I've been seeing numbers between 12 missiles and like 26 missiles. So, but it was more missiles than what actually hit something. There was confirmed that a lot of them, there was a handful of them that didn't actually make it to their target for whatever reason. Probably, it's hard to speculate, but probably due to incompetence. We're going to get into some of the theories about whether or not Iran actually meant to kill anybody or something like that later. But we'll get into that later on.
Yeah, and then at the end of it all, we're all sitting here watching the reports come in, and then Iranian propaganda reported that more than 80 U.S. troops have been killed in the attack. And this is something that MSNBC and other outlets uncritically regurgitated without confirmation. We now know that no U.S. troops at all were killed in the attack. And in fact, nobody, aside from one Ukrainian plane, had anybody die. And, It's kind of entertaining because you see then the memes that the Iranian state media then posts of Trump's tweet with the U.S. flag and the soldiers going through and coming out as coffins on the other side. And unfortunately, because of there's such strict controls on media in Iran, although it's not always very effective. That's probably what the Iranians think. They think that the supreme leader just killed over 80 some U.S. troops and got his revenge against evil Trump and the great Satan of the United States.
Well, and so that was one of the key problems. There was what Iran was telling the rest of the world versus what they were telling their people was very different things. So on the world stage, they had a very measured response, but internally they were reporting that they had this, because Iran purported that a lot of people were upset about Soleimani's death, and I imagine that a lot of people that working in the government were, and a lot of the government shills probably were too, which probably accounts for a significant amount of their population. Probably not a majority, but probably enough people to make a difference. They were very upset, and they were baying for blood. They wanted a response to the American Satan, or whatever they call us, and so when Iran shot at us, they wanted to make sure that their people knew that they counter-aggressed on us, and that it was highly, highly effective, that they killed, tens and hundreds of troops. And so they're reporting this internally. And you have live MSNBC and a lot of other outlets, but MSNBC was one of the worst perpetrators of this. They're pulling that information that is meant for internal Iranian citizen consumption to calm the rabid masses of Iranians. That was what that content was designed for. You've got MSNBC pulling that out, sending it back out to an American audience. That it's not for the American audience because it's propaganda. I don't understand why MSNBC does not understand that. Iran does not have, maybe it's because we don't have a real media anymore either. But
No, we don't.
Iran definitely doesn't have a real media. It's all propaganda. And you've got MSNBC pulling that propaganda out, processing it for the American people, sending it back out to us, and then having, just panels and panels of people analyzing this propaganda as if it could be true, and then thinking 2-3 steps down the line as to this could be true, and if it's true it means this, and then that means that, and then that means the draft, and we're all going into World War III, and you're going to get drafted tomorrow, and it's World War III, and they're basing all of this off of propaganda. Now it's perfectly acceptable to pull it up that stuff and report it saying, this is what Iran's saying is happening. We don't have any confirmation of that. And so it's important. It's contextually important to know that this is what they're saying to their own people. But we know that they often overblow what their capabilities are to their own people, and so we're not going to take this at face value. But instead, they again not only took it at face value, they started having people analyze it and people talking about it. And you've got people who aren't paying attention but that often, or people who are lightly paying attention or just watching MSNBC, and they believe this stuff and they see it, and they don't have the ability to process this in a rational way, and they're seeing, oh my God, they just killed like a whole squadron of U.S. soldiers. Like, they're firing missiles. Like, they're saying fire and fury. Like, we're probably going to war now. Oh, all the analysts are saying we're going to war now. Oh my God, the analysts are saying my kid's going to get drafted. Like, holy crap. And they spun up all of this crap. And it was, I don't think that an Iranian propaganda minister could have planned it as well as MSNBC executed it. Certainly not.
It really sucks that our own media is doing a fascist state's bidding. Sucks, doesn't it?
Yep, it's it's like we're just importing it. So let's see. So I could talk about what the media response was all day, but we'll move on here. A Pentagon correspondent told the BBC that the U.S. knew of a pending attack multiple hours before it happened. So again, we're trying to go through this chronologically, but at the time we didn't know a lot of stuff. So some of the gaps I'm filling in here are as with information that was discovered after some of it came out today. Some of it came out late last night. So we're just kind of mixing that all in here just for kind of brevity's sake. But at the time, some of the stuff was not known. But Pentagon correspondent told the BBC yesterday, I believe, that is yesterday or early this morning, that the U.S. knew of a pending attack multiple hours before it happened. I saw reports elsewhere that the U.S. had been monitoring mobile launch platforms that the Iranians use, and that it was pretty obvious they were lining up for an attack. And it had been projected that they would be lining up for an attack after Trump took out Soleimani. We just didn't know when or what it would be. The BBC also says that the U.S. Intercepted communications, which was, they were kind of vague about it, but it was probably something to do with like Iranian orders to prepare for some kind of launch, and that once the missiles were in the air, our network of early warning satellites immediately picked them up and started tracking it. As soon as something comes off the ground at anything faster than an airplane, we know about it. They said the specific part of our satellite network that picked this up was the part that is mostly tasked with watching North Korea. So you can imagine that thing's pretty sensitive, and it's pretty ready to go, that if something's got a ballistic trajectory, it's going to pick up on it and we're going to know about it. So let's see here. Yeah, so we kind of knew about stuff, and that's why, like I said earlier, there was no U.S. casualties, was because we had preparation from multiple sources.
Yeah, not only that, and this is totally unconfirmed, so take this with a grain of salt, but I did see a report. I was up very late last night following everything as it was coming in, but I did see a report too later that morning that the Prime Minister, I believe, of Iraq had said that he received basically word from Iran that the strike was incoming, warning them. Now, I'm not sure if that's true. Again, that's unconfirmed, but that would be very interesting if that was true. It honestly wouldn't surprise me. I think the resulting attack definitely shows that Iran was more interested in a show of force rather than getting all their cultural sites wiped off the map. So, but beyond the expert intelligence we were able to gather our own, there have also been multiple reports that Iranian officials told Iraq they were going to attack. Yeah, and that they should move their troops out of their way. Yeah, so that was I believe it's the Iraqi prime minister. I'm not 100% sure on his title.
Yeah, I can't remember the specifics on that, and there's so much information on this, but I know generally that's approximately what is being said happened.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's it just gives credence that they tell their own people on their own state-run media, and MSNBC just parrots it. Horny for those views, I guess, but they just repeat it, and they tell their own people that all these people died, and it's all just a show of force. That's all it is.
Yep. So both so those kind of are the two theories as to why we were able to 100% avoid casualties, is between our early warning system and getting kind of that heads up through Iraq that Iran had told them that they were coming for us. But both of these can be true. We can simultaneously have been told before the attack happened, and then also know that it was coming due to our godlike intelligence capabilities. Nevertheless, this has sparked a lot of debate as to whether or not Iran failed to kill Americans intentionally, or if it was just because they're incompetent. Earlier today, today, it was reported that an Iranian commander was quoted saying, "We did not intend to kill." There is also kind of a third crowd of Americans kind of in the discussion as to whether or not Iran meant to kill people, that really think that the distinction between whether or not they meant to do it is kind of irrelevant, given how all of this has played out, which is kind of be the rest of this show tonight is what the aftermath from this event has been. And then in a speech that Trump gave yesterday morning, after the approximately 12 hours after the event, which we'll get into more later, he cited that the reason why we knew it was coming was primarily due to our early warning systems, and that was the main reason why no one died. And I'm fully willing to, as a slight American propagandist myself, I'm fully willing to accept and support that, and I just think it's true. I don't think it's I don't think it's relevant that somebody told us that it was coming. I find it difficult to believe that there's not a flea that sneezes in the Middle East that we don't have satellite eyes on. I think that the idea that they could do anything in secret over there that we aren't seeing and that we don't know about, I think that's pretty that's a pretty old concept. I think that's thinking about 40 years ago. The modern era, with the stuff that's publicly known about, you got to imagine the military is a little bit ahead of what we actually know about. They can see a lot of stuff that's going on over there. Let's see here. And so while all of this was going on, the media, at the time, the night of, the media was making sure to drive home as much panic as possible. Part of that was by regurgitating Iranian propaganda, but there was also, oddly enough, two reports of earthquakes in Iran that happened within a few hours after the missile strike. And let's see here. Yeah, the quakes were a 4.5 and a 4.9 magnitude, which are pretty strong. It's not like crazy strong, but it's pretty strong. And those struck within 20 miles of an Iranian nuclear plant, which seems oddly coincidental that it happened right after they attacked us. But nobody's taking responsibility for it. So I guess we're left with the probability of it being an act of God, the good one. Either that or we got one hell of an earthquake gun, which is my theory.
Cough, cough, harp, cough, cough.
Yes.
That's what everybody was saying, like in the various chats and threads that I was following, is like, oh, it's Trump's harp gun in Alaska.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Okay. Maybe. I mean, who the hell knows? The other major incident that night was a commercial jetliner that crashed shortly after takeoff. Early reports of engine failure were quickly countered by social media users that found an alleged video of the incident showing a fireball falling from the sky and exploding on impact. The Boeing 737 was carrying 176 people, including 63 Canadians, several Ukrainians, 80 Iranians, and all are presumed dead on impact. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Unfortunately definitely unfortunately for the people on board, but secondly, unfortunately for Iran, is the only people they managed to kill were primarily their own people. And then CNN reported later that afternoon the Ukrainian plane that crashed Wednesday was shot down by 2 Russian-made surface-to-air missiles, SA-15s, according to a U.S. official familiar with the intelligence. The U.S. saw Iranian radar signals lock onto the jetliner before it was shot down.
Yeah,
that sucks.
So that's at the time, and this is breaking like up until about like 6 to 8 hours ago is when it started becoming like specifically acknowledged that we knew that it was Iran shooting it down, probably by accident. We'll get into that. But it was an Iranian surface-to-air missile that took down that plane. So before about 8 hours ago, it was all speculation that we all kind of knew that that's what it was. It was very unlikely that first off, planes don't just explode. I don't think that there's really ever been a plane that just fireball detonates the entire plane unless somebody does something to detonate it. There's even as recently as over the summer, there was some trending social media video of I believe another 737 MAX. The entire engine was on fire, like almost the whole wing was on fire, and it landed. It was fine. People are freaking out because this fireball's on the wing right next to them, and they're looking at it out the window, and they're taking videos of it with their phone. But like the plane was fine. So the idea that both engines failed, which is what the initial report was, and they failed so catastrophically that the plane turned into a ball of hot plasma, that was not believable. But it is only up until about 8 hours ago that we have confirmation of that, and the confirmation of it that we do have is pretty damning. So like I said, the U.S. we've got some pretty godlike intelligence capabilities, and the U.S. could actually see the ping from the radar that was tracking stuff in the area. They could see that it pinged and locked in on that particular plane, and then they've got the heat signatures of the 2 missiles that launched, and then they have the heat signature of it getting boomed and then the fireball going down and crash exploding on the ground. And then they also have, which was publicly available at the time, the telemetry from the plane, which shows that its transponder was reporting its altitude and velocity. And instead, normally when a plane goes down, it's transmitting that the whole way down because the part of the plane that flies it isn't the whole plane. So if part of it breaks, it's usually almost never, probably never, does a plane just spontaneously explode like that. And so the fact that the transponder immediately went out at altitude at the exact same moment that, at the exact same moment that there's a very large heat signature where that plane was, that is extremely indicative of that plane just exploding and not something else happening. So we have probably, beyond being sitting there watching the guy hit the button, we have absolute godlike ability to recreate this incident. We know exactly what happened. We can give you, millimeter accuracy on what was going on, where it was. It's gonna be impossible for Iran to get around this. And as speaking of Iran, as insane as they are, which is pretty goddamn insane, it's extremely unlikely that they did this intentionally. The most likely scenario is that Iran was on very, very high alert for anything in the sky after they attacked us. And rightfully so. They should have rightfully feared that we were coming to glass them. Iran has a very sophisticated anti-air capability, though, and that is the way that those sorts of systems typically work is that it's almost entirely automated. It will automatically classify and target a threat, but it will prompt a human operator before it fires. It wants the human operator to make sure that this is a thing that you want to take out of the sky. And in the heat of battle, it's very likely, highly likely, that a low-ranking Iranian radar tech somewhere got the alert of a possible threat, and he hit the fire button out of the fear that this target was America coming to rain Judgment Day down upon him. And maybe he was right. Maybe he wasn't, but there's probably a lot of stuff that we're never going to know about that night. But in that specific instance, that specific radar blip that he was looking at, he was wrong. And Iran now stands responsible for killing 176, mostly Westerners, and the rest of their own citizens, which is going to be a lot for them to answer to.
Yeah, and speaking of the other citizens, the other large half of the people that were unfortunately killed were Canadians. And in a press conference earlier today with Trudeau, multiple media outlets asked if he considered it to be the United States' fault, because that's what the media does, because this was all started with the drone strike. He gave a wishy-washy kind of maybe yes, non-answer. The correct answer was that this was Iran's missile. This is Iran's responsibility, and he stands with their American allies. That's what an ally should do, and that's what Trudeau should have done. But instead, he just made a non-answer. And it's actually pretty sad that the rest of the world seemed to be kind of staying out of this and giving non-answers. I think a lot of people across the globe are just kind of waiting to see how this all plays out instead of actually doing something about it and standing alongside their strongest ally who foots most of their bills in NATO. But, I guess time will tell.
Yeah, it's as much as this channel has made fun of Trudeau for a multitude of things. Most recently, he now is sporting a rather grisly-looking beard, which is funny. He has just this baby face, and then now he's got a gray beard on it, and just doesn't look good. But we've made fun of him a lot for a lot of reasons. But it's for cultural reasons that we're making fun of him, cultural political reasons, which there's a lot of fair game in the cultural politics among Western allies. This was something that's very serious and outside of that, and I'm extremely disappointed that he did not. He had a chance to stand up strong as the neighbor to the protector of the world, the most powerful country in the world. For all the talk that Europe wants to pretend that they're so civilized and all this shit, not true. Trudeau had a chance to have Canada, and Trudeau's been seen by Canadians as making Canada weaker, as being a weak leader on the foreign stage. He had a chance to stand up strong and say, this was, we're going to have a measured response, but this was an attack from Iran on our citizens. That's absolutely unacceptable. And we stand beside our ally, and we're going to we're going to go through a measured response and coordinate with them as to what our response is going to be. Instead he couldn't. You could not. You guys, I encourage you guys to go watch his press conference. But he was asked multiple times, do you think that the Trump is responsible for this? Because 7 links down the chain of events that caused this plane to go down. Trump was there taking out Soleimani, and there's 8,000 links behind that as to why Trump took out Soleimani. Somehow this is all Trump's fault now. So it would have been nice to see a concrete answer, but I guess that was maybe too much to expect from him. Let's see here. And then we've got this stuff all happened very recently, and so there's still a lot of coverage still coming out. Some of this is from just a few hours ago. We have up to I think about 5 different countries now that are all corroborating the evidence that we were discussing earlier of an Iranian missile taking out that passenger plane. We got. I know we've got information that confirms that. I think Iraq has some information that confirms that. Canada said they've got some information that confirms it. And I believe earlier Australia said they've got some information that confirms that. And some of that might just be reanalyzing our own intel, but some of it might be they might have independent analysis on it as well. But there's a lot of big players all saying the same thing. This isn't like the Steele dossier where it was, Steele says that this thing happened because he's citing a Yahoo article that interviewed Steele. Like, this is actual multiple sources. Actually, one of the first times in a long time we've had a media that's reporting on something that has 3 or more sources. So that's pretty incredible if among all the other things that happened this week. That's new. That pretty much means that it happened. It's very unlikely that that's not what happened at this point. Let's see here. So Iran has begun denying it within the last 12 to 8 hours, I believe. The time over there, I think they're about 10 hours ahead of us. I might be a little bit wrong on that. But this event is immensely important because civilian air travel, which was a civilian airliner, civilian air travel seen as particularly vulnerable to war. And as it is a primary means of travel for a lot of politicians all over the world, even somewhere as backwards as the Middle East, it is also a primary driver of commerce. This plane was full of Europeans. I'm kind of lumping Canada to the Europeans. They might as well be. And European commerce is the only thing keeping Iran afloat right now. We'll talk more about that shortly, bring up sanctions and stuff like that. But Iran will be standing alone on this, possibly MSNBC, but possibly MSNBC will stand next to them. But other than that, none of their pseudo allies like China or Russia, none of those people are going to stand up and defend them killing nearly 100 Westerners. That's just never going to happen. So Iran really, really screwed up on this. And it is now up to America and Europe to get on the same page. America's been on our own page for a while. This will, as tragic as it is, I don't want to undersell that. This is a horrible tragedy, but this will hopefully pull Europe to be on the same page as us. That would be one silver lining to this.
Yeah, and it actually would be nice to see, I was kind of skeptical on whether or not the world stage would actually, and especially the West would rally around Trump on this, at least for the downed at least for the downed aircraft, that you see some people already blaming the United States. Oh no, it was probably the U.S. shot it down, crazy stuff like that. But after the United States Navy shot down that commercial plane in the Persian Gulf, everybody was really quick to jump on the United States being the aggressor and evil and all these other things. So I was skeptical to see whether or not we would get at least a similar reaction or not, now that we know that Iran did this. But now that we know they did, basically with very little doubts, it's nice to see that the world is doing something about it. And then thankfully, one day ago yesterday, Trump gave a speech just before noon where he opened with saying, "As long as I am president of the United States, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon." And he said that before he said hi, hello, or introduced himself or anything.
I don't even think he got to the
first thing he said.
microphone. He was barely at the microphone when he said that.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
You can read that next part if you'd like. I didn't highlight it, but
he then said that the U.S. was looking to add more sanctions to Iran and expects the international community to finally nut up and help him out with this. Currently, the EU nations are not participating in sanctions with Iran, and they are still holding to the Iranian nuclear deal. The sanctions from the U.S. have been extremely successful in crippling Iran's economy and is on the verge of forcing their people to revolt. And in many ways, they already are. Right now, the EU nations are their primary source of economic activity. This is not acceptable. With the revelations that Iran took down a plane full of Europeans, the Canadians might as well be, maybe this will finally get them to take the threat seriously. But again, given that Trudeau is hedging his bets and making this Trump's fault, perhaps they won't. Trump also said that his plans to make NATO take a larger role in dealing with Iran in the future. Yeah, and I'm not sure if we mentioned it here, but I did see that a primary leadership role in NATO said that he agreed with Trump that NATO does need to take a much larger role in the issue with Iran.
No, we might as well spend our money on something, right?
Yeah, seriously.
I've got to think about that more. A lot of this stuff is kind of, there's not very obvious and good answers for stuff. I think even in the moment on Tuesday night when this stuff was happening, I'm like, oh man, this kind of shows Trump was wrong. Maybe, I got a lot of doubt on that. And it just seems like stuff's not obvious until much longer after it. So I don't know how I feel about NATO. I'll have to think about that more. But likely we won't know the true answer as to whether or not that's the right decision for, a generation. If we're still there in 20 years, we'll know it was a bad choice. But let's see here. So yesterday afternoon, there was some more reports of missiles being fired on the embassy in Iraq. No one is really there right now because it got burned down last week. And there's no casualties reported from that. It's speculated that this was one of Iran's proxy terror groups acting independently now that their coordinator, Soleimani, is dead. As a band of savage cave dwellers, these terrorist groups are not very well disciplined, and it is unknown to U.S. officials if Soleimani's successor can keep things under control. Thank you, Grunt Uwu, for the follow. We much appreciate it. How you doing, Grunt? I remember you. So the U.S. officials are unsure if Salami's successor can keep these savages at bay. They kind of do their own thing. My personal opinion is I don't think it matters if Soleimani's successor can keep things under control because his days are probably numbered. Earlier today, there were also reports that there were some more missile strikes near U.S. troop positions in Iraq. That was not very heavily reported on. Actually, I couldn't even find, as about 5 hours ago, I couldn't find any mainstream sources on that. I was only seeing it from news agencies that I didn't recognize the names of. But that was somewhere in northern Iraq, I guess, and it was near troop positions. It's unknown where they came from, but the initial reports that there were no casualties. And again, probably the same thing as before, where it was one of the terror cells acting independently now that their coordinator is gone.
Yeah, and in addition to that, this is something that I find really entertaining about this entire news cycle with this. Everyone's acting like, oh, Iranians are launching rockets and firing missiles and doing all these things for the first time ever against the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan and abroad. When I was in Afghanistan, the first thing they told us is they showed us, so they had like the crudely made IEDs, which are like these palm oil containers, and then you had the professionally made IEDs. And the professionally made IEDs, you could look at them, and they were exact models right out of Iran. Iran has been giving insurgent groups rockets and IEDs and guns and all sorts of things for a very long time, specifically to kill us. They hate us. They feel we are the great Satan, and some of it is slightly warranted, but most of it definitely is not. I mean, the things that the United States is responsible in terms of Iran becoming the nation that it is today. You can't say that it warrants the horrible butchery that the Islamic Republic has inflicted upon our people, who have, as far as we're concerned, have not invaded or destroyed Iran or anything like that. So
yeah, and it's I understand what you're saying there. It's not that their outrage is acceptable, but it is understandable to an extent, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we are there at all, which some of this is just there's no, I don't think there's anybody who's gonna go out there and say, except for like the biggest shill is gonna say that the military presence over there has been perfect every step of the way. We've been there for almost 20 years. We've made some mistakes. I think that's pretty well known. I don't think anybody would, that it's understandable. And so we can understand why they're upset with us being there. But, again, this level of vitriol and attack is not acceptable. A lot of those professionally made Iranian IEDs were more than likely specifically moved over there by Soleimani. So he was responsible for a lot of that movement of Iranian state-made weaponry getting into the hands of these terror cells. And so back on these rogue terror cells that are going to be shooting missiles at us. Thank you, Redry. Yeah, I'll go with Redry for the follow. We appreciate it. We're probably going to be seeing a lot of that in the next few weeks and months, probably a lot more than recently, because Iran has cultivated so many of these proxy terror groups, and we took out the guy that was coordinating that, and then now Iran, they've way overplayed their hand, and I don't think that they have any idea what they're doing, and it's probably not going to involve taking care of these little terror cells that they've cultivated. So it's highly likely that we will continue to see this for at least a little while, as these terror cells kind of get it out of their system and kind of go rogue as they will. I'm sure we will take care of that as it comes up, though. So let us get into that. Was kind of the rundown of the last few days in the week here. So let's talk a little bit about deterrence theory. Is it bullshit, or is there something to it? So the basics of deterrence theory, which I've been hearing a lot about recently, especially on the right-leaning commentary, has been talking about deterrence theory quite a bit. And basically what deterrence theory is I tell you, do not do that thing or I will hit you, and you end up not doing that thing because you're scared I will hit you. That is deterrence theory in a nutshell. A lot of commentators on the right are saying that killing Soleimani and whatever the heck happened in Iran 2 nights ago means that America has reestablished deterrence in the Middle East. I think it's probably a little too early to tell that. And then on its face, I think the missile attack, whether it was meant to hurt anybody or not, is a pretty clear indication that Iran was not deterred from action. But possibly because they pulled their punches, maybe they maybe they did deter a little bit. But while I may not yet be convinced that they are deterred, it is clear to me that appeasement did not work. The Obama administration appeased Iran through its entire administration, and Trump maintained that status quo for his first few years while he was finishing off ISIS. As you guys may or may not know, ISIS was a pretty big enemy of Iran as well, and so there was kind of an enemy of my enemy for a little bit with Iran when we were getting rid of ISIS, but Trump finished that off. So once that common threat was over, which is basically most of the year of 2019, Iran began escalating attacks on the West again. We had, people think that the attack on Soleimani, that was Trump escalating against Iran. I hadn't been doing anything at all ever. But the entire year of 2019, Iran was attacking shipping lanes multiple times. They shot down one of our drones, and they killed one of our servicemen about 2 months ago with one of their proxies that was like directly linked to Soleimani. So the idea that deterrence is a perfect idea, I don't think so. Maybe I'm overselling it, that people are saying that it's a perfect theory, but people are very excited about this idea of deterrence. But I do know that appeasement does not work. So maybe whatever the heck Trump is doing, whatever the Trump doctrine is, I guess if we're not going to war, I can get behind whatever the heck that is. What are your thoughts there, Krieg?
So and you can kind of see this a little bit with the way he dealt with North Korea too. His method is definitely speak very loudly and then flail your big stick around as much as you can. So I don't know. I don't know if it's working, but I know for sure that deterrence absolutely does not work if you're refusing to use it. And kind of on a similar note, one of the big debates going on and previously went on, and I think is still big talk, is in the UK. Jeremy Corbyn, when he was running for prime minister for head of government, when they asked him whether or not he would use nuclear weapons if Russia launches nuclear weapons and was about to wipe the UK off the face of the map, would he use nuclear weapons? And he said no. So the debate was, what's the point of having them if you're not going to use them? And so that kind of sparked a debate about deterrence. And so a lot of people have discussed on, is it effective? Does it work? I think generally it does. I think deterrence does work. The unfortunate part for me as a libertarian is that I don't believe that we should be using military action unless absolutely necessary. And the thing with deterrence is that you have to be willing to do things like taking out the second highest ranking member of a country who also happens to be a terrorist dirtbag in order to establish that you mean business, because after a while your adversaries will just think, oh, well, it's just Trump on Twitter. He's just talking. You won't do anything. And then he did. And they kind of peed themselves a little.
Yes, I imagine there was plenty of soiled trousers in Iran. I hope somebody was probably making the pants companies in Iran are making off like bandits this week.
Oh yeah.
But so I more or less agree with that. But more libertarian, more not super isolationist, but certainly more isolationist than not. Let's get the heck out of there. The idea of using non-military deterrence or coercion, Trump has really perfected that with other countries, using the economy to really throw his weight around, throw America's giant economy around the world and get people to do what we want to do. That's been very, very successful. That is as successful as it can be in Iraq right now. Europe is not helping us. That is a big problem. We don't need Europe for a lot of stuff, but it would be more helpful if they were to be helpful. I will say that. The idea of the deterrent strategy is, if you say you're going to do something, you got to do it. And so you should not say something that you're not going to do. And I will go back to what I said earlier. The tweeting out that we have targeted 52 sites, that was, oh man, that was cocaine for the base. That was cocaine for all the rabid bloodlust on Twitter that people were having. Oh man, there was a lot of people that wanted to go to war on Twitter. They're not. I say a lot, but it's a lot for Twitter, which is not a representative of a lot of Trump's base. But there was certainly that loud minority of Trump's base that was like, "Let's do it. Let's go to war. I'm ready." And that's I don't like that, but So Trump gave that out, and that was more meant for the base than it was for, I guess a declaration of your foreign policy, which is what Trump's Twitter has become. So I understand why he did it for cocaine for the base, but that was not something that he should have done for the world stage. That certainly hurt his position. That has, I think that kind of that pulls to the extent that we have reestablished deterrence. I think that tweet did a lot of damage to the idea of deterrence. So I don't know. Like I said, a lot of right-wing commentators are talking about this idea that it's been reestablished, and I certainly think that Iran has realized that appeasement's over, but I'm not. I think only time will tell if deterrence is actually been reestablished. I don't think that you can tell that right now at the immediate time. And again, like I said, they were talking about deterrence before this Iranian missile strike, so that kind of debunks that theory. But I think that to the point that we could do deterrence, I think the strategy would be make simple threats that you are willing to act on that are significant enough to them. And then sometimes do stuff that you didn't say you were going to do to respond. I miss the Trump from the campaign trail. I wish I could pull Trump from 2015 up and have him talk to Trump from 2020 and tell him, hey, I'm not going to telegraph what my foreign policy is. I'm not going to, say here's what my specific plan is. We're just going to do it. We're not going to tell everybody. I missed that. I think a lot of people were liked that idea that we wouldn't tell the world stage, oh, we're planning a pullout in 93 days, no surprise, or we're planning a troop increase over the next 18 months. Just do it. Don't tell everybody. Don't tell your enemies what you're doing. And I think Trump has forgotten that, and I wish he would remember that.
Yeah, I mean, what works so well for us in the Cold War is, go ahead, try it. We will wipe you off the map with our nukes. Yes. It's weird because for me as a libertarian, but also a nationalist. I believe in smaller government. I believe in less government restrictions. But at the same time, the government that does exist should be strong enough to be able to combat any adversary that would, dare ever infringe on our human rights or our sovereignty. And and I don't know. I totally agree with you, though, that, threatening to take out 52 cultural sites, that's not necessarily a good idea. Like you stated before, that kind of sounds like shit that ISIS was doing, and that's not good. Yeah. Wiping historical artifacts off the map belongs to humanity.
Yeah. And I think, as much as I don't like that, I agree with the people that were countering that, saying, "Oh, don't worry, he didn't really mean it." And it's like, okay, well, I get that, but that makes it worse. That makes it worse.
Yeah,
the idea that you're going to make threats that you're not going to follow through. So, I'm not as mad about it, and the idea that Trump was threatening cultural sites, because I don't think that he actually would do that. And if he was actually going to do that, I'd be much more upset about that. But the fact that he wasn't actually going to commit on that, and he didn't commit on that, that's a bigger problem.
I mean, if Trump really wanted to have the ultimate peaceful deterrence to Iran, one would absolutely be what he's already doing in trying to secure the rest of the world in pushing sanctions on Iran. But then the second part too would be what the Iranian Islamists did in the first place, which was they got really pissed off over your goddamn blue jeans and rock and roll in our country. We're turning into Americans, so they revolted. So just threatened to airdrop a whole bunch of American cultural things. That's been kind of my Game theory. Of Thrones. There you go.
Yeah, my theory has been, if we're looking at the goal right now is to have Iran revolt from within. We would like their regime to change, but we don't want to go to war to do it. The way that the regime changes without us going to war is they have to do it internally. And so this doing anything from the outside, I understand the why we did stuff, but doing anything from the outside risks galvanizing the Iranian people, and stops that possibility of revolt. I don't think that we stopped it with this, but I think we did some damage to it. And I think that our efforts moving forward needs to be focused on reaccelerating that internal revolution. So given all that has happened, the last 7 days, do you think that it is time to get out now? Is this a reason to stay, or is this a reason to go, or does it not matter? We should just go or stay regardless.
It was time for us to go a while ago. We obviously, this is something that I talked to yourself and Dyer, was yesterday, a couple days ago. It's all blending together.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've been there for a long time, and unfortunately, what our government fails to realize is the U.S. military is not a force to rebuild countries. We are not a nation-building force. That's not what the military was designed to do. The military was designed to kill bad guys, and break down doors and break shit. We're not doing that so much anymore. Now we're rebuilding schools, and then the terrorists show up and blow up the school, and then we rebuild the school, and the cycle repeats. It's not effective. It's not working. I really think that it's time for it's long overdue for the United States to completely pull out of the Middle East, aside from maybe a few select bases to protect our allies. But I think we absolutely need to pull out military force first and foremost, and definitely, I mean, not just in the Middle East as well, but like across the globe. I don't think we need to be in Japan or Germany or anything like that anymore. I think that's a little bit crazy. But in addition to that, I also think that foreign aid needs to be completely cut off to every other country in the world, especially and pretty hot take right here, but especially countries like Israel that seem to be doing so well economically. They definitely don't need our tax dollars to support them. They build their own weapon defense systems. They do a fantastic job at it. The Iron Dome defense system for incoming anything is very effective. I don't think we need to continue supporting other countries with our tax dollars. And I would say that the only time that we would need to give foreign aid to another nation is in times of great emergencies like earthquakes or fires or anything like that.
Yeah, save it for when they need it. I mean, it would be wonderful if we had a big war chest of aid. Kind of a weird way to put it, for Australia. I'm not sure to what extent that we're helping out Australia. I would imagine that we're helping out quite a bit. But imagine how much more we could help out if we didn't have all this money going everywhere else. And to your discussion about evaluating aid with Israel and all these other countries, a lot of this stuff, the entire reason why we're over in the Middle East for the last for the current iteration of 20 years anyways, is just from inertia. And a lot of that aid money is from inertia. We started it up generations ago. And it's just been, you don't want to be the guy that has to go, tell everybody there's no Santa. Okay, well, we're gonna cut off Israel now, or we're gonna pull out of this area now, or we're gonna stop this whole aid program. And I certainly imagine that when we started giving aid to Israel, they absolutely needed it. But I don't disagree with you. They've got a plenty strong economy. I know that they have a very healthy welfare system with universal health care and stuff like that. And to the extent that we're padding some of that, we would, it's certainly worthwhile to reevaluate that. That gets a little hairy with certain members of Congress right now, but it's something that is on the table. Everything should be on the table to be evaluated, especially all of this old stuff. This idea of us being in the Middle East for this 20-year war coming up on 20 years, that's all just inertia. It's, Bush handed it off to Obama handed it off to Trump. Trump's doing his best. He's trying. So we'll see if he can actually commit on that. But yeah, I agree with basically everything you said there. Is let's pull out of the area that we're talking about, but everything else, at least evaluate it. If we've been there for more than a generation, let's evaluate the need that we're there for. If we're just there for inertia, let's stop. If we're just giving aid because that's what we've been doing. Well, why wouldn't we give aid? We've been giving aid the last 60 years. Why wouldn't we give aid next year? Well, that's probably why we should evaluate giving aid next year. So yeah, that's definitely. So I think our consensus is yes, we should still at least out of the Middle East, at least out of Iraq. Should we pull out? I think our consensus here is yes. Now the big question is, but will we pull out?
Nah.
Oh,
Unfortunately, I think Trump would like to. I think he would see it as one of his crowning achievements in foreign policy to get everybody to pull out. But I don't know if he's strong enough. The neocon military-industrial war complex it's strong, and unfortunately for us, the Cindy Sheehan left-leaning Democrats, the anti-war people, yeah, they'll do anything just to spite Trump, and that includes keeping us there. I'm pretty sure that I saw before all this was going down that the Democrats were saying that oh, Trump, you need to stay, you can't leave Iraq, it's not time yet, and then strangely enough, some like neocon Republicans are like, yeah, I agree with them, and it's ridiculous. But yeah, unfortunately, yeah, I don't think we're going anywhere. It'd be really nice if we did. I think we could. I think there's other more important uses for our military.
For what it's worth, for a long time, every president before Trump and Trump himself, all those major military leaders have advised him that the war with Iran is an inevitability, and it's only a question of when, and when is the most politically advantageous to go to war with Iran. Because I see in their mind that's the only way to combat the nuclear threat that they present. Trump is the first president to reject that analysis and say, no, I have a better way. I think we can do it through economic and cultural pressure, right? And I think he's right. And one encouraging thing I've seen is I've seen some military leaders recently acknowledge that their plan is to get out of Iraq. That they're now trying to find a way to do that. It's no longer the assumption is we're staying.
Yeah, so I mean, we've talked about this before. When the military is asked to solve a problem, you guys have a limited toolbox of things that you can do to solve that problem. It mostly involves blowing it up, and that's because you're the military. That's your job.
We do it really well.
Yes, you do. You do a fantastic job of it. But when Trump is asking his advisors on military matters, he's asking military people, and their solution to that problem is a military solution. And to the extent that Trump has anybody who's giving him an alternative other than just coming out of his own head, I think Tucker Carlson is his only other advisor, which is funny because we all get to see what it is that Tucker's advising Trump on every night at 8:00 on Fox. Is he doesn't have. It takes a lot of willpower to be hearing. I'm sure that all the things that the military advisors are telling him about what Iran will do if we leave, I'm sure that's extremely terrifying. I would imagine that is a very stressful thing to hear. And then to have to try and say, man, am I going to be the one that causes all those terrible things to happen? Whether or not they're going to actually happen. But that's what the military is saying is going to happen. The advisors is, it's going to be bad if we pull out. And I understand why they're saying that. But the idea of having an alternative strategy, that the fact that it would be bad if we just pulled out, we didn't have an alternative strategy, that's probably correct. But if we have an alternative strategy, primarily an economic and cultural one, that changes the math a little bit as to what will happen. But the military advisors are maybe not the right people to get the sole recommendations from on that. So it is so to the point of will we actually pull out, I'm guessing probably not. If someone could do it, it would be Trump. If somebody can go up, not necessarily up against the military leaders in an adversarial way, but just taking what they're saying and saying, I hear what you're saying, but I think that my idea is going to work. If anybody can do that, it's Trump, because he's crazy in a good way sometimes. But I can, if we don't. Not that it's, again, this is one of those things where it's an understandable concept. It's not an acceptable concept. But if we don't pull out, if Trump doesn't actually pull out, I would understand why. I don't think it's acceptable. I do think we need to pull out. Maybe Trump just needs another 4 years, and he'll get this solved up. So.
Yeah, I mean, people think Trump is an asshole now. Just wait until he doesn't have to worry about re-election.
Oh, that's me. That's going to be an interesting time for everybody.
It's going to be brutal. I really think it will be. When he gets reelected, he's just balls to the wall. Just, I don't care what you have to say. It's happening. Just make it happen.
So that kind of goes through our timeline of what happened recently and kind of our evaluation of what's going on. Like I said, there's a lot of people that are like making very definitive statements that like, deterrence has been reestablished, and like definitive statements about like other things that they think this means. We are way too close in time to what just happened for anybody to be giving definitive statements. And then, me and Krieg just sat there and kind of spitballed on our kind of takes on what we think this all means for a little while. But I don't think that there's not anything more that we can really say on this, and there's not really anything more that other people can say on this right now. A lot of this is going to be still taking time to play out. Direwolf Media will certainly be revisiting this topic in the future as things become available, as some of this stuff kind of as these tight coils kind of unwind themselves and reveal as to what's going to happen in the future. I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting 2020 for the Middle East. It'll be an interesting election year. But unless you have any other closing shots on that, we can move into kind of our historical retrospective on Iran, which you put together a very nice last century as to what happened here. You have anything else to say?
No. I just hope I didn't write too much.
We'll see if we can run through this real quick. So, so for you guys out in the audience, we're going to go through starting out in 1906 and kind of just run through some of the major cultural events in Iran. Iran, I don't have really good demographics in our audience, but those of you that are under 30, before you were born, Iran was a very different place. What some people described as a Western nation in the 80s. So we're going to kind of go through how they became that Western nation and then how they are no longer that Western nation. So it's interesting to kind of know how that happened, because like I said at the beginning of the show, the media is not bringing up any of this context. They'll go back further than 3 minutes to let you know that the Americans shot down an Iranian plane by accident back in the 80s, but they're not going to take you back to the 80s to tell you about what kind of things Soleimani was doing back then too. So we'll let Krieg go ahead and take this off with 1906.
All right, so Iran has a very long and very respectable history. Prior to being Iran, some people might know it as Persia, and the Persian Empire rivaled, known by many different names, rivaled even the Roman Empire. And some say Persian Empire was a big reason that they brought the Romans to their knees. So Persia, which later became Iran, was ruled around this time period of 1906 by the Kahar dynasty. And I really apologize for anything I mispronounce, but I'm going to do the best that I can. Their latest ruler at this time, the Saha, or king in English, Muzaffar ad-Din, he was basically this king who was taking these really, really expensive trips to Europe during the time as king of Persia. And he was neglecting a lot of the issues that his people were having. And more importantly, in order to pay for these very luxurious, expensive trips to Europe, he was taking out loans from Russia to pay for them. And what really scared the people of Iran at the time was that we're taking out all this debt with Russia, and we're giving Russia all of this influence over us. And Russia, a neighbor of Iran, would love to get some of that Persian territory. So at this time, over 10,000 people led by the merchant class marched on Tehran, Tehran being the capital of Iran, and forced the Shah to allow a constitution to be ratified. And then he basically proceeds to sign it in December, and then he dies 5 days later. Died of a broken heart, basically. His successor, Shah Muhammad al-Shah, Ali Shah, wanted to destroy the constitutional government. He hated it. He hated his power being restricted. So he rode into Tehran with Russian Cossacks and bombed the parliament building, suspending the constitution. And there is an Iranian word for the parliament building, but I could not pronounce it. So we're just going to call it the parliament building. And in 1909, constitutional forces then responded and marched on Tehran. And the Shah leaves in exile to Russia, the original Russian pawn. There was a Anglo-Russian agreement, which is this agreement between Britain and Russia, basically to divide up their influence of Persia. Basically, all these Western countries wanted a sweet chunk of Persia because of that delicious black gold, and basically there was a constitutional crisis as a result of that, and the government itself. The constitutional government really struggled to maintain a balance on the budget. So the United States, trying to help out a little bit, sends a treasurer general to help balance Persia's books. This, of course, angers Russia, who demands the treasurer's dismissal. Russian troops, I didn't put it in here, but it was led by that original Shah, basically were ready to march on Tehran. But the Bakhtari chiefs of Iran, Persia, then surrounded the parliament building before the Russians could arrive, and basically forced them to accept the Russian ultimatum.
Alrighty, so then we move into 1925. We got Imperial Iran with Reza Shah Pahlavi. We'll go with that. Reza Khan is the supreme commander of the armed forces, and the prime minister is forced out of power. Majas then the crown of Reza as Shah and becomes Reza Shah Pahlavi in April of 1926. Man, it's hard to try and like explain stuff from the region just because you can't tell if it's like the name or if I'm stuttering or what it is. You've got Pahlavi or Pahlavi is determined to bring Iran into the modern era. Sounds familiar. And strengthens the army to 40,000 through conscription. Yes, conscription armies always work so well. He builds secular schools, roads, and trans-Iranian railroad, a European-style university in Tehran, and nationalizes factories, oh boy, sees those means of production, to produce basic consumer goods. Basic consumer needs. There we go. He imposed European culture, brought women into the schools and workforce, and banned the veil in 1936. Very progressive. At first, there was great support for the modernization and reforms that exponentially improved the quality of life and living conditions. However, he did so by a militaristic police state that censored the press, arrested and tortured his political opponents, and harassed and murdered the Islamic clergy, going so far as to desecrate their sacred sites. As his reign progressed, he gave himself many acres of land and forced harsh taxes on the peasants. Those damn peasants. The Soviets despised Iran's economic policy, and Shah offered the British, let's see here, he offended the British by canceling the oil deal they had with the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which was probably during the height of British colonialism. They always had little companies all over the place. And that was controlled mostly by the British that exported Iran's oil, which if I remember correctly from that era, like almost all oil production in the world was at some point controlled by the British. The agreement would be eventually re-signed and angered both Iran and Britain. That means it was a good agreement. This led Pahlavi to invite German nationalists, and investors into the country before the Second World War. Iran was Germany's greatest trading partner prior to that war. During the Second World War, the Allies were attempting to send military aid to the Soviets, and they needed to cross into Iran to do so. Sahih Pahlavi refused, and the British and Soviets decided to invade Iran instead. That's what you get. Pahlavi abdicated his throne to his son, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. Sounds like the same name. And he was captured by the British until he died in South Africa in 1944. Rough life.
Yeah. So didn't know if you knew it, but Iran was good old buddies with Nazi Germany for a while. So this is
accurate.
Yeah. So this is his son. Yeah, that guy. This is his son, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. So after the war, there was an attempted takeover by Soviet-backed communists. Iran found itself under the leadership of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, a populist and leader of the National Front Party. By this time, Iran was mostly funded by oil revenues through the exportation of oil through the British-owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. However, the Iranians found that most of the supposed revenue that was supposed to be going into the Iranian government's pocket was actually being hoarded by the British. So Mossadegh, the current prime minister of Iran, he attempted to basically negotiate with the British oil company, but unfortunately he was unable to secure the 50-50 profit sharing that was attempted. So General Ali Ramaza came to power as a new prime minister, and he was also unsuccessful in securing a new oil deal with the British, and eventually he was assassinated by radical Islamic terrorists. In April 1950, the Iranian parliament persuaded the Shah to name Mossadegh prime minister again. So here he is. He's back again. In 1951, Britain decides to pull its oil business out of Iran, embargoes all Iranian oil, and bans Iranian goods, citing an illegal effort to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. So the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, being a British company, the Iranians, specifically the Prime Minister Mossadegh, was attempting to take over the company and nationalize it under Iranian control. So the British obviously were pretty pissed off about that. So they go to court. They go to international court where the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company basically attempted to make a few concessions, like, hey, we do business, maybe give you a few things, and we do business. But Mossadegh basically said, get lost, and he refused all agreements, believing that he could still get a better deal. Unfortunately for him, the economy of Iran suffered without the oil exports, and Mossadegh's power grew. As his power grew, he became more of an authoritarian. He attempted to appoint a minister of war, granting him control over the armed forces, and the Shah, the king of Iran, basically said absolutely not. So he denied it. Mossadegh then resigned, and then after 3 days of pro-Mossadegh rioting, the Shah was forced to appoint Mossadegh again as head of state. So he's back for a third time. Then the Iranian parliament granted Mossadegh supreme emergency powers for a 6-month term.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, which in Palpatine style, he decided to grant himself an additional 6 years.
Oh, yes, of course.
He then dissolved the Senate and then finally lower parliament.
I saw this movie.
Yeah, I know, right? So now the Iranian parliament is completely defunct. The U.S., fearing Mossadegh's rising power and that he might be working with the Soviet Union and the former Communist Party that attempted to overthrow Iran in the first place, and his crazy authoritarian leanings, they were worried that he could overtake the country as a communist nation. So President Eisenhower greenlit Operation Ajax, a joint operation between the British and Americans to overthrow Mossadegh and return power to the Sahha. At first, the coup failed and the Sahha failed, but after pro-Sahha military units defeated Mossadegh's forces in the streets, he was arrested and placed on house arrest until his death in 1967.
So, to kind of recap, what I'm hearing is that they kind of started off the 1900s with a pretty classically corrupt leadership that kind of introduced them to the European way of life through his corruption. They kind of got that going. Then Britain kind of did the colonial thing that it was doing back then. Worked with the oil companies there. They had it looked like some kind of socialist or communist type setup for their economy and taking over the means of production to create goods for everybody. They had an opportunity to play the right side during World War II, and they chose not to, which angered America and England, who had a lot of investment in the country. And then after that, they kind of did what a lot of people towards the end of the colonial era in the 50s, Britain and America for that matter, were kind of figuring out if we were going to continue doing this colonial thing or not. And it sounds like what happened in Iran is what happened in a lot of other places, that there was a lot of infrastructure and economic movements that were based out of England and or America, that their economies were based off of. It sounds like a lot of Iran's economy was based off this oil business, as it is now. And they had some disagreements with England as to how they should move forward with that, followed by having this Mossadegh guy pop up over and over again with some some corrupt dealings with probably all that money that they're getting from that oil. I think that's about the summary there. So that brings us up to, what was this, 1967? All right.
Yeah. So then the Sahha's in power now.
Okay. So that's the guy that we wanted in power. Alrighty.
Yeah, so like this is the big thing that like a lot of like the pro-Iranian people that you see on Twitter and other places are talking about. This is Operation Ajax, which they always bring up, which is basically the United States illegally through the CIA overthrew the government, the democratically elected government. The only part that they tend to leave out is that the democratically elected government decided to disband the democratically elected government and give himself supreme authority and institute the first galactic empire.
Ultimate power.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that kind of goes back to where a lot of this modern anger at us is over things that your average American has absolutely no idea about. Some of this stuff I'm hearing for the first time here. I'm getting some education here as well. But you ask the average Iranian, it sounds like they probably are aware of some of these things and they're upset about it. They have this generational anger over these things that happened, and the average American has just moved the hell on. We've got no idea what they're upset about. And like I said, one of the reasons why I'm very happy that you're here going through this history lesson with us is you guys are not getting this from the mainstream media. They're not giving you this context as to why are people upset about us. Nancy would love, and MSNBC would love to tell you, and for you to believe, that Iran is upset at us for Trump killing Soleimani 7 days ago. And do not think any further back than that. But as we can see, this is stuff that's developed over the entire last century. And as I said, I think probably a lot of a lot of your average YouTube audience, a lot of our average streaming audience is probably in that 30s and under. We know what the previous generations did with the world. A lot of it good, a lot of it not so good. But there's some of the it's good to know what happened so we can kind of see what it is that we have to deal with. Maybe it doesn't fix what we have to deal with, but we can at least understand it. And maybe that's a few more steps towards actually being able to solve it. So moving on here through the, so now we got the Shah in power, which is who America put in power with the CIA, as you just said. And let's see here. So the Shah's White Revolution. That sounds ominous. The U.S. gives economic endorsement to the Shah's government, and the Shah solidifies his political power by centralizing his control of the state around himself. Fearing the influence of the Soviet Union, the Shah strengthens his relations with the U.S. and Britain and enters into an alliance called CENTO after Iraq leaves it. Despite rapidly growing revenue with a new oil agreement, several industrial and agricultural plans, and complete control of the government, the Shah could not get the Iranian economy to grow, and soon they were in a severe recession and unemployment soared. After pressure from JFK's government, the Shah appointed a prime minister who advocated for reform. The steep economic reforms for the new prime minister's government, though only seemed to strengthen the recession and drive unemployment further. Sounds like they had a new deal there. After the prime minister was unable to cut the deficit, the Shah refused to cut defense spending. The United States stopped their support of the prime minister and cut aid to the country. The prime minister resigned. A new prime minister that the Shah appointed, who was also a loyalist, implemented land reforms, profit sharing for industrial workers, and nationalization of forest. So he nationalized the forests. Sale of government businesses, and the establishment of literacy corps. So like a book club.
Like a military book club.
Yeah, there you go. And the Shah proclaimed this his White Revolution. These reforms were not popular with clerical leaders. They as they opposed the land reforms, suffrage to women, and the implied extension of the Shah's power. Yes, the Islamic clerics are for the suffering of women, not the suffrage. After a speech where the Ayatollah Sayyid Ruhollah directly attacked the authority of the Shah, he was arrested. The arrests spawned some of the most violent riots Iran had ever seen, and the Shah brutally retaliated and quelled the uprisings. So the I know from my personal understanding of this, so like the Ayatollah, you guys are probably hearing stuff about the Iranian Ayatollah now in modern era, which is also their religious a religious leader of sorts. Back then, this was before their religious leaders were also their political leaders. So this Ayatollah, back in the 60s, he was not the leader of the country. It sounds like we're about to find out how that came about, though. Khomeini was eventually released in 1964, but after another, quote, treasonous sermon, he was arrested again and exiled to Turkey. Khomeini remained in Iraq at a Shia holy site for 19 years. Despite the assassination of the prime minister and an attempt on the Shah's life by radical Islamic groups, the economy seemed to slowly recover, and Iran solidified itself as a military and economic power in the Persian Gulf. However, with overcrowding and not enough jobs for college-educated Iranians, not everyone in Iran was enjoying the success of the Shah's new Iran, which is key for setting up a revolution.
Yeah, and during this time too, we're used to in modern day the Ayatollah, the supreme leader of Iran, being the Islamic Republic of Iran, and Islam being everything that Iran is about and all the time. But during the Shah's reign in Iran, Islam was I hate to use the word oppressed because it's so overused today, but the Islamic people were in a lot of ways oppressed. The Saha wanted to bring the country into a progressive modern era. He wanted to give women, and he did give women equal rights to vote. He banned the forcible wear of the veil, which today we know as the burqa, or the hijab. And he brought in blue jeans and rock and roll and Coca-Cola, that everybody could enjoy. And the Islamic people didn't like that.
It sounds like this is kind of at least in the modern era, the original clash between Western and Islamic values. I think they're obviously clashing today, but that people would like to pretend that it's a new thing. It's not related to the cultural issue, but it appears to be, it's been going on since the two cultures have been rubbing up against each other. And so, it's not surprising that they're at such odds that whichever one is in power, it is violently oppressing the other one. Not that that's right, but it's another one of those things that's understandable. Not correct, but it's understandable.
Yeah. And what we have to realize, though, is that why the Iranians have such a disdain for the West is because you had a leader who was Hitler light, basically. He was not so authoritarian to murder gas 6 million Muslims, but he did, they were almost like second-class citizens, and he kept beating them down, and he instituted this police state that would go door to door and arrest people that he felt were his opposition, and you keep doing that to people, you let people like Khomeini come to power. So that brings us to the Islamic Revolution. So in 1967, the Saha decided to recrown himself in an official capacity, taking on the title of Ara Meher, which means the light of the Aryans, which is really interesting. Many world leaders were invited to celebrate, but ironically enough, not many Iranians themselves were invited to the celebration of the Saha. This angered many of the Iranians, as you would assume, who already did not think that the monarchy was a good thing in the first place. Khomeini condemned the celebrations from his cave in Iraq. After the riots of 1963, little political opposition remained to oppose the Saha, and instead these groups formed violent militias and terrorist organizations to vent their continued frustration with significant cultural reforms that the Saha brought, especially against Muslims. And it's kind of interesting. I when I was reading through this, I thought this was really interesting because here you have a dictator in a country that does not have First Amendment rights. So, and you can't form political parties, you can't protest, you can't do anything against his power. So the people had no way to vent their frustrations. So instead, they formed violent militias and violent terrorist organizations and started killing people because they felt they had no ability to actually voice their opinions.
So it's like they've got they picked up Western culture, but they, to the extent that Russia and Germany, the Soviet Union at the time, or maybe not the best representatives of the West, they picked up their version of enforcing a government and then just generalized Western culture with the ultimate clash against Islamic values.
Yeah, and
it's a weird experiment. That was a weird experiment.
Yeah, really, and as you can see, it didn't work.
Oh God, man. Who could have guessed? So
Khomeini, still in exile in Iraq, continued to make anti-Saha speeches and organize Islamic supporters. In the Vice Regency of the Islamic Jurist, which is a book that he wrote, Khomeini advocated for an Islamic state and vowed that all Muslims should vie for this against the Saha and his illegal state. So this is part of his becoming this religious leader, but also a political leader. He basically believed that any state that is not an Islamic state is invalid and illegal. By 1977, Iran's economy was strained against these new restraint against some new construction programs instituted by the Saha, and furthermore, with the influx of Western dress, food, radio, films, music, and more, many Iranians felt that their Islamic and Iranian culture was being eroded away by Western foreigners. Sure, Germany's feeling something similar. This was further agitated by the establishment of a one-party system by the Saha, which gave disillusioned Iranians no real way to express their disagreements. On the international stage, the Saha's government was called into question for human rights violations, for its treatment of prisoners and suspension of basic human rights for its political opponents. If any of you are familiar with Amnesty International, this is kind of where they started. After several riots had broken out, largely oppressed by Islamic groups, the Saha's forces had cracked down and some protesters were even killed. After each protester was killed by the Saha's military, more and more would join the fray, urged on by Khamenei still in Iraq. The Saha attempted to make concessions with the moderate party and his government, but they only agreed to form a government if the Saha would leave the country. And in 1979, he said he was going on a short vacation to Europe, and he just never came back.
That'd be like if Trump just like was like, I'll go over to a Trump hotel in Europe, and it just never came back.
Yeah, basically, and it's actually interesting because his descendants actually still live here in the United States, and we basically still pay for them to live here, and that actually pisses off Iran too. But what are you gonna do? So Khamenei then rolls in, and so before that. There's a new prime minister basically that sets himself up, Prime Minister Bakhtiar, and he basically comes in, he restores free elections and attempted moderate reforms. He basically attempted to undo all of the fascist Nazi bullshit that the Saha was doing and say, hey, let's be like, let's try to get along. Khamenei basically said, no, not good enough, and denounced the government as illegal because the only government he's okay with is an Islamic one, and decided to return to Iran to stage referendum, as he said, in the streets of Tehran, which is kind of like an Antifa-style referendum. Khamenei then decided to set up his own government and named his own prime minister against the sitting Bakhtiar government. And then, interestingly enough, with the encouragement of the U.S. military under President Jimmy Carter, Iran's military began deserting to Khamenei's forces. So at this point, the U.S. felt that a coup was inevitable, and it was better to support Khamenei's forces than to make an enemy out of him. Boy, we screwed up.
Thanks, Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, what a dick. And then in February, Khamenei's rebels basically had convinced much of the military to stand down and took over the majority of the government and their buildings. And the Saha's monarchy completely collapsed.
As long with the Western ideals of Iran.
Yeah.
So then we got the Islamic Republic of Iran. Khamenei would declare himself the supreme leader, and that he was not bound by the new government. He's just all-powerful. You guys may know, or you kind of have seen, or heard of people, their Persian ancestry. This is kind of, there was a large group of refugees who came over from Iran after this revolution, because the new Islamic government was doing some of the same things that the previous ones did to them, and a lot of them needed to come over here for safety reasons. I knew where I grew up at was a large area of settlement for they called themselves Persians when they came over here. They kind of dropped the Iranian name, but they were refugees from Iran during this time period, and so I knew a lot of the second, third generations growing up. But that's where they came from. If you knew people growing up called that they were of Persian ancestry, this is where they came from. This is from this event. But this is where we back then, before this happened, they were, like Krieg was saying, blue jeans, rock and roll, Coca-Cola, somebody that we had some common ground with, somebody that we could talk to and understood culturally. And after the revolution, that was all gone.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, so Khamenei, the guy before we have up here, he the first supreme leader of Iran. So his whole thing and why he wanted to revolt was because women were getting the right to vote, and he was like, "That's bullshit." And then he becomes the supreme leader, and he can do anything he wants. Like, there's a prime minister who's elected, there's a parliament, and he decides to just go ahead and allow women to vote anyway. And this actually pissed off a lot of the Islamic radicals who were like, "Dude, what the heck? Like, you told us that you told us you were gonna, keep them in the kitchen." And
who's gonna make our sandwiches?
Yeah. So he didn't follow through on his promise. And actually, interestingly enough, a lot of people don't know this. There is a lot of like, compared to Western values, for sure, there is a lot of oppression on women in Iran, but women can still be members of parliament. They can still run for office. Although it really doesn't mean anything because the supreme ruler has the supreme authority, and it's always a member of the clergy. It's always an Islamic leader. But interestingly enough, Iran actually elected more women as a part of their parliament than the United States did in many times.
That's weird. Like, it sounds like over the last century they've had kind of a weird fusion of kind of fascistic, Islamic, and Western, just a weird mismatch of cultures and government institutions.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. Iran is a really, really weird place. And it's like, one of the things over there that's really interesting is that they ban all Western music. But when you go to any of the, like, Iranian colleges or the Iranian schools, they ask the kids, like, who their, like, idols are, and it's always like American, like, pop singers and things. It's never like Iranian, like, officials or Iranian music or anything like that. So everyone's pretty sure that they listen to Western music anyway, and they just do what they want.
So I guess for your guys is how this ties into modern events. So the current Iranian government, they've only been there for not very long, for the last about 40 years at this point now.
Yeah, 30 years.
But prior to that, they had decade after decade, nearly a century of oppression by what they saw as Western ideals. Maybe an imperfect implementation of them, but that's what they saw. And they finally had enough of it, and they took over, and they have not lost that skepticism and kind of that cultural disdain for what the West did, or what they imagine Western values did to them. And they kind of see that, especially their elders. They see that in America. They see that in Europe. And we've done a lot of stuff over there. The current iteration of us being over in the Middle East, that's not the first time. We got we've had previous military engagements over there in the 80s and 90s. So their experience with us as the West has been generally, guarded, because they're very skeptical of us of after what's happened to them for a century. And then most of their actual engagement with us has been military, military operations of some kind, one kind or another. So, that explains a lot as to why they're seeing what they're seeing with us. And so for the Democrats and the media to say, okay, it's all due to this one thing that Trump did 7 days ago. It's a lot deeper than that. This hate goes back a long time, and it's been building, and will continue to build forward. It's got a lot of inertia behind it that is not going away anytime soon. So you guys see stuff in the mainstream media, see commentators, politicians saying that this is very simple. It's very specifically it's Trump's fault. If Trump would just be Orange Man good, they would Iran would calm down and they wouldn't hate the West. If we just appease them to death and sign checks to them like the Obama administration did, they would just love us, and they'd be all happy about it, and everything would be fine. That's not going to happen. And I think the other the other side of that coin is there's nothing that we did. Well, there's not much that we can do to make it stop, but there's not much that we can do to make that stop. So us being over there it's not going to do anything about this disdain for the West that they have. It's a lot deeper than us.
Yeah, and it's more, and it's maybe, it is a lot of disdain for the West, but it's also a lot of disdain for America, specifically. Partly doing so is because they're repeatedly told, they rename their streets after places in Palestine. They hate Israel with a burning passion. But there's a lot of Iranians who, like average Iranians, who just don't really care. They're like, we don't live in Palestine, we live in Iran. And there's this huge disparity between the government and the people. One of the things, two interesting things that I saw as a result of this was, one, the Iranian clergy are getting really pissed off because the Iranian people aren't actually practicing their religious sermons and things like they were supposed to. So they're not good practicing Muslims like they wanted them to be. And then the other one, in addition to that, was interestingly enough, and to kind of wrap up, is the protesters in Iran that have been going on, and the protests that have been going on for the past few months now. People have been asking and shouting in the streets, "Come back, Saha! Come back, Saha!" So they want crazy Hitler light back, because they regret what they did. So just give them.
They just don't know what they want.
Yeah, just give them time. They'll come around.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, that was we went through a lot there. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you at least got the gist of it if you weren't following exactly. Lots of bonus points if you were following exactly. But I think that was great. I know I definitely that gave me a lot more context for dealing with the situation that I didn't have, and I wasn't finding anywhere else. There's not a lot of other people talking about this, and certainly, again, not the mainstream media. So we thank you for that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the show. Dyer and I will be back on Saturday for a weekly news recap. We'll also be playing games. So hopefully nothing crazy happens between now and then. Hopefully we can get back to focusing on petty things like the impeachment. So that'll be lots of fun. But thank you so much for joining us today, Krieg. I really enjoyed having you. Did you have fun? Good time? Yeah,
I had a great time, and I really appreciate you guys having me on. I really do appreciate it.
Awesome. We had a blast. So you wanna show your content again real quick?
Yeah, I'll show myself one more time. So you can follow me on Twitter at Krieg Blackpaw. There is my handle. Please share. Why do? There we go. So you can follow me on Twitter at Krieg Blackpaw. I stream very casual streams. The Direwolf streams and Fox's streams are very organized and well done. I stream very shitposty kind of.
I paid him a lot to say that. That was the entire Direwolf media budget for January.
There you go. I'm rolling in it. A whole $5.
Yes. How'd you know?
So but yeah, my streams are much more relaxed. But if you want to come by and see me play some RimWorld and possibly get your name in one of the characters and hear my bullshit libertarian opinions, you're more than welcome to stop by.
I would definitely love to do that, man, and we'd love to have you back sometime too. So, but thank you for joining us. You guys all have we hit 2 hours with or without Dyer. Thank you guys all for joining us. Like I said, join us back on Saturday. Go follow Krieg. He's a good, funny guy. Very, very casual, very, very shitposty. Dyer says he loves you guys. He loves the pack. He misses you guys. He was sad he couldn't be on the show tonight, but like I said, he'll be back on Saturday. You guys have a fantastic rest of the week. This will be Trevize signing off.